For all these techniques that we've learned, then the next thing we want to think about is what if we want to add in then another technique. So in this case, a strike with one hand and then a strike with the other hand. That's different, for example, to a strike with one hand and another strike with the same hand. We'll look at that separately. But strike with one hand and then a strike with another hand. So there's certain quite famous ways of doing some of these movements within each one. So the first one is step one and then step out into the back pivot routing like this, and the push back routing. So 1, 2, and stepping out to the side in this way. And the rationale for this posture is, again, it's like, well, I'm using the phrase slingshot, but it's not quite that, is it? 1, 2, to get this momentum of the side strike here, and we can compare and contrast that with the alternative, which is a really useful technique, which we also need, which is what we call the pendulum cross in Western boxing. And that's where you just go straight in, 1, 2, and you use this kickback routine because the foot's going back like that. As the punch goes out, the foot's going back, and as you're pressing into the floor, you're hitting into the target. So the pendulum cross, front foot goes first, and what you've got to do with this is you've got to spring up, spring up, and then push back. Lead from the front foot like seeking step, spring, you see the spring, but as you spring, then you spring forward, then you've got to push back with the kickback routing into the posture. That's what solidifies the strike. All of a sudden, now when you hit them, you're hitting them with the floor. We use this term, you're hitting them with the floor. And you can feel this, like if you're holding a pad for someone, you can feel it when they root this properly. The solidity that doing this right adds to a technique is amazing. So if you've not worked on this, get on the bag and just practice, like with one hand, just hitting the bag, and just practice the difference and pushing from the floor. And it's not just about power, it's about the stability of the movement. So if you're quite experienced at holding pads for people like I am, one of the things you can feel is when it's not rooted like this, the glove is, the whole structure of the body is kind of loose, and you can feel that when it hits the pad, it makes the pad, because the arms wobble in, the pad wobbles, and you can feel it. But when it's rooted properly, you can feel how absolutely solid it is, creating this better consistency of. I was reading some Wang Chen Jai last night, as I do, where he's saying, you know, like, you've got to find that right balance between hardness and softness. The trick anyway is to coordinate the seeking step and the kickback. Seeking step, spring forward, because you want to get some, usually, because it's a good technique just to use on its own. So you can do it from a jab and then straight in, but it's a good technique to use on its own. But either way, usually you want to get some distance on it. You want to be able to just spring in with it. So you need to spring off this front foot. Or just get in that right way. You spring up and then kick back into the solid root. That's the trick. That's the thing you've got to work on. When we do it out to the side, it's a slightly different posture. It's a slightly different requirement, because with the normal pendulum cross, you lead from the front foot, so the front foot goes first. It's just not quite the same feeling with when you step out to the side. You are leading with the front foot, but you can really feel like the movement begins by pushing on the back leg, and the foot, of course, doesn't go out straight, it goes out to the side like that. And you want to try and land as flat as possible with your foot, but it will vary. And the rationale for this kind of sidestep, first of all, the idea that it's going to add power into it like this. Secondly, because of the nature of the structural movement, you just want to get a better structure relative to your opponent. So if you hit straight like this, or if you open up a little bit like this second one, it's just a bit of a bigger structure, you can just get more power and more twist into it. So it's starting to add up things towards the power. And the third thing is that it's this kind of Shaolin sensor line theory that you shift 45 degrees relative to your target and then hit at a 45-degree angle to the target. Assuming they don't move, but in reality, of course, people move all the time. And then the next thing is the idea that you're not just going in through what we used to call the front gate in the old Chinese martial arts. So you hit him once, but then you're going round to the side of your opponent. You're trying to take the side of your opponent, and that then feeds into ideas around pushing and stuff like that. So it becomes a little bit easier to push people off balance. You can push them this way so that you can get to their back, and then you can sweep and you can. So 1, 2, or you can change. So you're coming in at a 45-degree angle, which is the classic Shaolin Chuan theory: either attack the centre line directly or move in from a 45-degree angle. And you can practice this in various different ways. So you can do one off the spot and then change, which is a really good variation. And when we do that, then our routing's got to be a little bit more sophisticated. So we go from the pivot routing, instead of completing the full wave all the way down, we go and change this way. So this is a really important idea that comes into play later on when we use different kinds of routing, like quarter routing, and it's very important in weapons as well, particularly with the staff. And we can use that kind of Bruce Lee idea of the half beat. So if that's one beat, we change on the half beat. So instead of completing the full pivot, foot pivots up, and then boom, then we change from 1, and then it goes out like a kind of tentative step, somewhere between a tentative step and kickback routing. 1, 2, and we shuffle over to the side and then change into the, and we use this shift, like this Elvis shift, to change one structure into the other, and that also adds a significant amount of power. So it's exactly the kind of theory you see in karate or Shaolin Chuan or something like that, with the shift from horse stance into bow stance. That big structural shift, which is one of the key elements that we want in each one, differentiates it from Western boxing, for example. So 1 off the spot, and then without the heel going down, change, and then shift. The qua shift this way to add the power. And the kinetic chain goes down, rooted from the back foot, and we push in. 1, 2, 1, 2. It's exactly the same if we go 1, 2 with the hook. Just the foot turns a little bit more, as it usually does with the hook. 1, 2. Turns a little bit more, makes the stance just a tiny little bit wider, just to contain the power and the energy. Because when you do proper full contact, proper full power, the energy is big, and it's really easy just to pull you off your route like that. So one of the sophisticated little things that you have to do, if you are finding that you're doing this and you're just kind of going over all the time, you need to think about sinking your qua more. So the qua being the pelvic area, and by sinking we mean just thinking of it all as a hydraulic structure, just sinking it lower a little bit, making your centre of gravity lower. So 1, 2, just sinking that centre of gravity as you look at this kind of stance, this kind of crooked stance. And you may recognise this from forms such as Nanchuan 32. It's this kind of, it's a dragon riding stance, I think. It's exactly this posture from traditional Chinese physical culture. So for the hook, 1, 2, and then uppercut, 1, 2, you just change, and you're just leaning back a little bit more with the posture. When we do it with the step, the seeking step first, the seeking step lands flat, and then we change into this way, so it doesn't use this half beat structure. It's the same for everything. 1, 1, and then 2, 1, and then 2. Seeking step lands flat and then changes and the back foot comes up into the kickback routing. However, what we will very often see in traditional Yiquan training is the step forward for the jab, the cross, and then the step back for the jab. So 1, 2, 3. Cheers, mate. 1, 2, 1, 2, and then step back. And what this posture is teaching us, amongst other things, is from the cross out and the lifted up heel, kick back routine. What we want to then do is shift our structure back, so the structure goes back on the back foot, and we change and shift our direction and our stance back forward this way. So it's again a structural shift like this. The idea being that this adds power into the movement. We don't just want to, if we were going to jab from here, it's quite an odd hitting across this way. We can do it that way, but obviously it's that openness, and it's just a little bit of an awkward movement. Really, that's more of a hook, isn't it? So there's no reason why we can't 1, 2, 3 and change like that and practice like that. But for the basic training, just to get this idea and just develop this mobility of the front leg, which can be quite an awkward movement at first. But most important of all, this idea of just turning back on the back foot and lifting, changing the structure this way. So it's this half pivot movement, but now it's becoming more sophisticated because we're not just doing that. We're not just turning back like that. We're lifting and turning our front foot. And now we're taking more weight, particularly on the calf. And it's a more sophisticated ability to pivot on the ball of our foot. That will really help later when we come to do things like kicks off the lead leg, where we pivot on the ball of the foot like that and twist the foot. So the standard exercise is 1, 2, 3. I'm just developing this footwork skill. Which a lot of people have problems with at first, so it's helping to build. It's a really elementary exercise that builds on multiple different things. Your ability to shift structures, shift directions, and also just the mental ability to do something that's really, really simple, but actually when people come to do it at first is really hard to do quite fast and powerful. If I was going to say there's an issue with that posture, I mean there's technical things about 1, 2, 3, should you necessarily want to do this. It's not something that necessarily feels like it suggests itself, for example, in sparring and stuff like that. So if I had one criticism, it would be that there's a fetishization within each one of certain, let's say 3 or 4 very simple, very basic steps. And where this comes from, I think, is a misunderstanding of the difference between simple techniques and simple core movement concepts. Simple techniques don't necessarily have multiple infinite variations, but simple concepts, if they're really good simple concepts, simple movement principle concepts, will have multiple infinite possible variations. So if we think of something about just the basic structural logic of an Yiquan jab, where we can practice, and this is the way we do practice things like with simple cardinal directions like straight out, higher, lower, at an angle this way, at an angle this way, you know, these kind of cardinal directions. And once we practice like that, then we realise this structural paradigm can be applied in any way. There's infinite, literally infinite possible variations of where we might want to take the punch to, and they're all using the same thing. So that very simple structural movement idea that underpins the jab, we realise the jab is just one possible variation. It's another reason why when people say boxing and Yiquan have completely different completely different, you know, concepts, and you shouldn't bring them together. So when people are criticising Yao Zhongzhun, either implicitly or explicitly, by saying you shouldn't incorporate boxing, I think like they completely missed the point. It's like, it's nothing to do with the, you know, you hold your hand out like that and you throw, you know, there's a jab. Like, that's just a word that we use for this basic kind of posture. It's the underlying physical quintessence movement principles of Chinese physical culture. That's what we're trying to use to access this ability. If you don't get that, then you don't get Yiquan. That's the bottom line. So this can go anywhere along the same. It's an incredibly simple idea. You know, there's no limit. There's no limit really. The only limit is the physical capacity of my body. That's another reason why, by the way, why flexibility is important in Yiquan. It's very often under-emphasised. If your body is more capable in terms of flexibility, then there's more possible things you can do, particularly with kicks. There's more variations of things that you can do. And in that sense, you know, there is a limitation on freedom, but that's about cultivation and working on yourself. But what we really need to do then is break out this idea that we only need, you know, there's just step in and there's step out, and in many cases, like, people haven't even got that, they just do this. And I've got news for you, this isn't enough. Not only is it not enough, like, it'll take me about 3 seconds to work out when you're going to step and how you're going to step next. And I might not be right every time, but I'm going to be right most of the time. Because I'm just going to know your foot's going to go there. Well, where else is it going to go? If all you ever do is that, you're either going to do that or you're going to do that. And we do see this. We do see this in Yiquan. It's like a really limited. No, Yiquan itself isn't limited. Yiquan itself is just like part of the message I'm trying to get across. It's not like other systems. It's not something that's handed down. It's not something that, well, we go back to like Jeet Kune Do, like an idea of freedom that becomes perverted into just copying Bruce Lee's movement. And if you don't do it like Bruce Lee, then it's not really Jeet Kune Do. Like, that's totally opposite to the idea that there's a logic that exists because of human beings, but it's beyond human beings. There's a logic to each one. There's a logic to the movement. So we can keep adding infinite. Where do they come from? All these infinite variations of different steps and things like that. Well, they're just inherent in the logic of it. So we need to explore those things when we think about Yiquan footwork. And the idea of simplicity isn't the idea that, oh, I'm keeping it simple, I just do this. You know, and yeah, okay, if you're immensely high level, you might be able to make that work, but the true meaning of simplicity isn't just simplicity in movement. It's the idea that you can use simple movements, and that's a very sophisticated skill that often comes, well, really for everyone, it comes from practicing a range of techniques and exploring a range of techniques so that you can then intuitively learn the right one. And I call this a kind of physiotherapy. So I have people do drills to make that footwork become second nature, that trained intuition, the ability to choose the right footwork in the right time, to make it become second nature. Then you can use simplicity, simple footwork. And using simplicity is far more complicated than it seems. It's far more difficult to train in reality than just doing Mo Sabu. And also then the perversion of Yiquan into just thinking that everything has to use this and everything has to flow around that. That's just being wedded to a technique. That's not freedom, and it's not real Yiquan theory. So you need to use a range of different kinds of footwork. So for example, rather than one and then stepping out, that's not always the right move. You might want to go, as I said before, one and then keep this front foot exactly on the same line. There might be lots of reasons for that. Their leg might already be here, so you hit and then you want to move forward straight in, because you can't move your foot out because their leg's there. You'd have to sweep it out of the way. One and then straight forward. So practicing techniques like this. 1, 2, and then Very similar rules apply. You can one and down and then step through, rooting from the back foot, or you can one and then go straight this way. We usually don't do that because it's a little bit of an ankle twist. This one, and again, you start kind of feeling these things intuitively, just through years and years of practice of drills of different kinds of footwork. One, I don't really want to go straight forward usually like that, unless it's really deliberate, and I'm going to do something like this to avoid something. Usually I want to go in flat, one down, and then flat with the seeking step into the punch, just because I can feel my body is teaching me, my body is my teacher, and this is the essence of Yiquan. So all these people who say, you know, you've got to train with a teacher and all, yeah, but your primary teacher is you. Proceed via intuition. Yiquan is something you unfold. It's not something that someone teaches you. It's native. It's native to you. It's intuitive, and your body will teach you. So there's all those different kinds of footwork, but we're not really looking at footwork in this series. We're looking at routing, so we don't want to get too far into that unless it becomes relevant to the discussion. So next we can think about, if we've done moving forward with a jab and a cross, say we'll keep it basic. You can apply yourself in most cases to different kinds of techniques. If we think about now moving backwards, so we're going to go one from we jab, and then we want to shift back and throw a backhand cross. What's our routing and what's our stepping? Now, just as I was saying before, like your body kind of teaches you, or just the logic of it. It's not something that's primordial in you in that sense. It's like it's essential to the logic of the movement. So from here, just by the laws of physics and reality, one, you can feel like, well, I can push back. So if I want to move back, why wouldn't I just push back and use this kind of shift back for the backhand, which is the best way of doing a shift backhand strike anyway. It's fast, it's punchy, and it's easy to be explosive with it. So if your front foot's already up, then that just adds even more to it, because it's easier to use this springiness to change back into the kickback routing. So that's the best way of doing it. 1, 2, like that. 1, 2, 1. Now we start seeing another dimension to the pivot routing, that it gives us this springiness. And we talked about that before, but we didn't necessarily talk about how that allows you to propel yourself forwards and backwards more easily in a way that you can't. Like if I do jab with my front foot flat, or if I do this old way of doing it, if I go 1, that's quite an awkward movement to then shift back into the backhand punch. So that's one very good reason why that kind of routing is pretty much outdated for a jab. So 1, 2, 1, 2. And the way that things can develop like that should tell you a lot about the logic of each one, that it's not contained in some, you know, the knowledge of one teacher, or this is the orthodox teaching. It's contained in the logic of movement itself, contextualized by the reality of the fight. So some people want to go like that and then like that, just because that's how they were taught, and they want to. It's something about human beings needing to belong to something and to be validated by belonging to like a lineage or something like that. And it's something Wang Shangjai wanted to abolish. And the idea of erasing this concept of lineage is to bring our focus back onto the idea that each one is something you unfold. It's something more profound than just a fixed set of ideas that are passed on. What's passed on is the access to the Chinese physical culture principles.